At 52 degrees Celsius, the glass skyscrapers of Dubai do not suddenly melt into the pavement. They do not shatter in a synchronized collapse, and the skyline does not simply surrender its transparency to the desert sun. That is a cinematic illusion. Looking for a sudden catastrophic material failure is the wrong way to understand the true pressure placed on this metropolis. The real danger begins quietly. It begins when the perfectly transparent center of a glass pane is scorched by direct afternoon sunlight. Its outer surface bakes, yet its edges remain hidden and run much cooler inside a conductive metal frame. The materials pull against each other, and all the while, the enclosed room directly behind that transparent wall is relentlessly refrigerated to maintain a comfortable illusion for the people inside. The glass stretches. The mechanical cooling system absorbs the invisible burden. Dubai is absolutely not officially abandoning its glass architecture. The crystalline towers are still rising. But how heavy can the burden of a fully transparent skyline become before luxury is forced to build solid walls again? To find the exact answer, we isolate just one single square meter of glass. 52 degrees Celsius is a number that commands immediate attention. It sounds like a definitive breaking point where modern architecture should logically stop functioning. But to truly understand what this extreme number actually means for a soaring skyline, we must place it firmly in geographic reality. 52 degrees is not the everyday temperature you experience walking out of a shopping mall in coastal Dubai. It is the absolute regional extreme, logged deep in the arid interior of the United Arab Emirates, at remote weather stations like Swayhan. However, as an engineering benchmark, this peak number is incredibly important. It represents the outermost edge of the climate envelope. It is the ultimate stress test. When a building envelope is subjected to this kind of punishing radiant heat, there is no magical physical switch causing every glass panel to fail simultaneously. The ambient air temperature broadcast in the weather report is not necessarily the exact temperature that breaks the pane. A modern sheet of architectural glass responds to a highly complex equation. It reacts to blinding solar radiation, the specific geographic orientation of the facade, creeping shadows cast by neighboring towers, and crucially, the artificial temperature being rigidly maintained on the inside of the building. The number remains a severe warning, but it is not a warning about sudden destruction. To understand what it truly warns us about, we need to trace the journey of the heat by following one highly engineered piece of the skyline. Let us narrow our entire focus down to a microscopic level. We are going to look at just one individual module of glass facing dead west, positioned high up on an ultra-premium residential tower, capturing the full unfiltered glare of the punishing afternoon sun. This single square meter is our protagonist, and it is a masterpiece of material engineering. It is a highly calibrated, multi-layered protective system. There is the exterior pane, designed to take the very first aggressive strike of the climate. Behind it sits a hermetically sealed insulating cavity, filled with heavy inert gases to slow thermal transfer. Then comes the interior pane, treated with advanced microscopic low emissivity coatings engineered to bounce solar radiation back into the sky. Holding this delicate sandwich together is a precisely extruded aluminum frame, wrapped in industrial-grade sealants. This single square meter has a virtually impossible daily job description. It must remain visually invisible, offering the occupant an uninterrupted panoramic view. At the very same time, it must act as an impenetrable fortress wall against aggressive solar radiation. It has to withstand layers of abrasive sand and corrosive salt particles blowing in from the sea. It has to endure relentless thermal movement day after day while maintaining absolute airtight integrity. A full-height view is never just a passive visual feature. It is a highly demanding structural contract written directly into the skin of the building, and the very first place that contract is tested is the edge, hidden completely out of sight deep inside the metal frame. Late in the afternoon, the complex geometry of the towering city creates a highly volatile environment for our single square meter of glass. The sun drops lower, hitting the completely exposed center of the module with intense direct thermal energy. But architectural design is rarely perfectly flat. Perhaps a massive neighboring skyscraper is casting a sharp, fast-moving diagonal shadow across the lower half of our window. This specific interaction between blinding light and sudden shade creates a severe thermal gradient. The glass exposed to the direct sun heats up incredibly rapidly, expanding outward. But the glass submerged in the shadow remains relatively cool and static. Even more importantly, the entire perimeter of the glass, the exact edge securely tucked away inside the metal framework, is permanently shielded from the sun. The highly conductive aluminium frame absorbs and sheds heat at a completely different rate than the rigid silica it holds. The hot center violently pushes outward. The cool edges stubbornly resist. The entire panel is caught in a quiet, invisible structural tug-of-war. The thick structural silicone sealants are precisely designed to absorb this constant movement. They flex and yield, taking the physical punishment. But if the temperature differential becomes too extreme, or if there is even a microscopic manufacturing flaw right at the vulnerable edge of the glass, the accumulated stress will inevitably find it. This is the fundamental mechanical reality behind thermal breakage. It is a slow failure born from unequal tension within the material itself. If the structural safety heavily depends on the microscopic coating, the precise edge quality, and shifting shadow patterns all working in flawless harmony every single day, we have to ask a critical question. Is this still a simple window, or has it become an over-engineered machine, perpetually fighting its own environment? Against all odds, the pane survives the afternoon. The sophisticated engineering holds its ground, and that is exactly where the far more exhausting challenge begins. A structurally shattered window is a highly visible failure. It gets replaced, and the building simply moves on. But when the glass survives the blistering heat of the afternoon sun, the heavy burden of that survival does not simply vanish. It is merely transferred from the exterior facade directly into the interior mechanics of the building. Even with the most advanced low-emissivity coatings, a glass facade cannot completely defy the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. A significant percentage of radiant heat inevitably passes straight through the transparency and directly enters the interior living space. Once that thermal energy crosses the threshold, it becomes an immediate mechanical obligation. Imagine the human experience inside this pristine architectural marvel. A resident sits in a luxury living room wrapped entirely in glass, facing the western sunset. To prevent that room from rapidly turning into a suffocating greenhouse, the building must launch a massive mechanical counterattack. The internal environment must be aggressively artificially refrigerated. The roof chillers throttle up to maximum capacity. Giant pumps push deeply chilled water through an intricate network of hidden pipes. The air handling units roar into continuous action, blasting freezing air into the room to battle the constant radiant heat, silently bleeding through the glass. The irony of this situation is deeply physical. The occupant inside often finds themselves shivering, pulling on a heavy sweater while sitting directly under a vent, blasting freezing air, just to counteract the overwhelming heat radiating from the glass wall merely 2 meters away. This is the brutal mechanical warfare hidden behind modern construction miracles. The transparent wall, designed to connect the occupant to the beautiful outdoors, instead traps them in an aggressively controlled artificial microclimate. The building survives the heat, but it does so by deploying enormous amounts of energy just to maintain a fragile illusion of comfort. But the struggle to maintain this transparent illusion goes far beyond the daily battle of thermodynamics. We must also closely examine the immense physical and human toll required to keep this sheer vertical surface pristine. A sweeping glass facade is not a set-and-forget structure. It demands a staggering amount of highly specialized human intervention. Look directly outside that same perfectly sealed, hyper-cooled apartment window. Suspended 60 stories above the baking pavement is the human element that luxury architectural renderings never dare to show. A dedicated team of rope access technicians hangs precariously off the side of the towering structure. They are completely suspended in the blinding glare, enduring external ambient temperatures that easily hover around 40 degrees, surrounded entirely by heavily heated metal panels and intensely reflecting glass. Their entire job is to painstakingly squeegee away the stubborn, abrasive desert dust and the highly corrosive layer of sea salt that the relentless ocean breeze constantly deposits onto the facade. Without these workers braving the extreme vertical environment, the breathtaking view would become hazy and severely degraded within a matter of weeks. The building demands their extreme physical labor, and as the facade ages, the logistical demands strictly multiply. Thick structural sealants baking in the sun must be physically inspected. Heavy rubber gaskets must be rigorously tested. If a specialized glass unit eventually clouds over, replacing it requires complex crane logistics and massive suction rigs to extract a heavy custom pane while the city continues to move frantically below. The glass does not care about convenience. It simply demands constant, highly skilled human labor to protect it. You are looking at an ongoing, labor-intensive operation. One single square meter of glass, with its intense thermal stress, shivering occupants, and sweating rope access technicians, is a manageable problem for an elite property management team. But Dubai did not build just 1 square meter. Pull the camera back from our single pane of glass and watch as the entire floor reveals itself, wrapping the perimeter in absolute transparency. Pull back even further, and the imposing facade of the towering structure comes fully into view. Finally, look out over the sprawling, tightly packed skyline. Suddenly, you are no longer looking at individual windows. You are looking at hundreds of thousands of individual thermal vulnerabilities, all glowing intensely under the midday sun. When a specific architectural design choice is aggressively multiplied to the scale of a sprawling metropolis, it instantly ceases to be just an aesthetic preference. It becomes a critical systemic piece of the citywide energy infrastructure. This massive multiplication of demand is exactly why the city has implemented stringent, highly detailed regulations. It is why local building codes meticulously dictate the specific performance metrics of every new piece of glass. It is why massive governmental energy entities were established to target the complete energy retrofit of tens of thousands of existing buildings. Keeping all those transparent rooms artificially cold accounts for a massive dominant fraction of the total electricity generated in this extreme climate. If the building envelope were just a minor aesthetic detail, the city would never need such aggressive retrofit programs to constantly control it. When millions of glass modules simultaneously demand maximum mechanical cooling and intense physical inspection, the facade acts as an active, incredibly thirsty drain on the regional power grid. Faced with this immense structural and grid-level pressure, a very tempting narrative quickly emerges. It is the story that the city is currently preparing to banish glass skyscrapers forever. People assume the Skyline will soon be retrofitted into heavy windowless concrete fortresses just to survive the incoming climate shift. It is a highly compelling story, but it is fundamentally untrue. Dubai is absolutely not abandoning glass. Modern architectural glass, when deployed with profound engineering intelligence and massive financial investment, can absolutely survive and function beautifully in a hostile hot climate. Recent advancements in sophisticated solar control coatings are genuinely remarkable, fully capable of stripping massive amounts of heavy thermal heat right out of the light spectrum. Heat-strengthened safety glazing can easily handle violently shifting thermal stress without fracturing. Highly sophisticated building management networks and incredibly efficient district cooling systems can optimize the heavy operational load, making the transparent luxury dream technologically viable. The empirical evidence does not show the city surrendering the material to the desert. It shows the industry spending exponentially more design intelligence to force the glass to survive. So if the glass is successfully surviving the heat, what exactly is coming to an end? The answer may not be the death of a material. It may be the death of a long-held architectural assumption. It is the end of the deeply ingrained idea that extreme luxury must always look perfectly transparent from every conceivable direction, regardless of the ultimate systemic cost. To completely understand what the next phase of this skyline looks like, we have to imagine an entirely new kind of architecture. It is a concept that merges high-end aesthetics with rigorous climate survival, a design philosophy we can define as solid luxury. Picture a standard, fully transparent tower block baking in the sun. Now, watch closely as the exterior facade begins to intelligently, deliberately react to its harsh environment. The northern face, receiving mostly indirect scattered light, might smartly retain a much larger expanse of traditional glass, preserving the premium panoramic views where the thermal penalty is at its lowest point. But look at the eastern and western facades, the sides that take the absolute worst brutal punishment. They begin to radically transform. Deep, heavy vertical terracotta fins emerge from the structure, effectively breaking the direct path of the low-angle sunlight. The formerly flush windows retreat deeply inward, becoming heavily recessed and protected behind substantial shading structures. Massive sections of the highly vulnerable transparent wall are completely removed and replaced by highly insulated, thick, solid, opaque panels. Deep, usable, heavily shaded outdoor terraces are carved directly into the southern face, cleverly utilizing the massive geometry of the building itself to cast profound, highly effective cooling shadows over the remaining glass below. This is what true architectural adaptation looks like. It relies heavily on external shading. It embraces self-shading geometry. It champions the tactical, highly selective use of expensive high-performance glass, strictly reserving transparency only for the exact locations where the view actually justifies the thermal burden. True climate adaptation requires a brilliantly calculated interplay of deep shadow, heavy insulation, and highly selective transparency. The future skyline may simply become significantly less exposed to the punishing sky. The ultimate decision to embrace this solid, shaded future will not be made solely by visionary architects. The true breaking point for the relentless all-glass tower is found inside a heavily air-conditioned corporate boardroom. Imagine a very high-stakes real estate development meeting. Sitting tensely around the large table are the primary developer, the specialized facade engineer, and crucially, the long-term institutional investors who actually fund the skyline. They are intensely analyzing a fundamental growing vulnerability in the modern economic model of luxury real estate, particularly within the highly volatile hospitality sector. This city possesses a phenomenal tourism engine, but it remains deeply tied to unpredictable global economic flows. When international tourism is absolutely booming, a fully booked, transparent luxury restaurant looking directly out over the Burj Khalifa easily generates enough premium revenue to justify any exorbitant cooling demand. But what happens when the market dynamics inevitably shift? The global hospitality industry is heavily prone to rapidly changing travel trends and sudden unforeseen economic slowdowns. When foot traffic abruptly drops, the expensive tables in that breathtaking glass-wrapped restaurant sit completely empty. The beautifully designed space becomes totally desolate. Yet, the blazing sun outside does not check hotel occupancy rates. The extreme heat still mercilessly batters the western facade. To prevent the desolate interior from turning into a structurally damaging greenhouse, the massive cooling systems must continue to run at an incredibly high capacity. The building hemorrhages capital, desperately cooling a totally empty room just to maintain the operational baseline. The sweeping glass facade suddenly morphs into a fixed, inflexible financial liability. There is absolutely no data showing that the property market has collectively declared glass towers obsolete. But as intense energy performance requirements move deeper into the core logic of investment decisions, a profound realization is taking shape. Maximum glazing may eventually stop meaning maximum financial value. The real threshold is crossed the exact moment when the premium value created by a panoramic view no longer covers the escalating capital cost of defending that specific view from the climate. The extreme heat only has to shatter the fragile business case for putting that transparent pane everywhere. We return finally to exactly where we began, high above the bustling street, looking closely at our single isolated square meter of west-facing glass. It is perfectly structurally intact. it has definitely not melted. The dramatic cinematic disaster never arrived. The room behind it is still comfortably artificially cold, and the towering skyline continues to gleam brightly under the relentless desert sun. But now, you can clearly see absolutely everything standing immediately behind that illusion of transparency. You can practically feel the intense thermal stress silently pulling at the hidden aluminum edges. You can clearly hear the massive mechanical chillers working aggressively. You can picture the exhausted rope access cleaning technicians waiting high above, and you can visualize the heavily calculated financial risks piling up relentlessly on the other side of the beautiful view. The resilient skyline of the future will absolutely still be highly modern, but it will possess real architectural depth. It will finally embrace deep cooling shadows. It will place vulnerable transparency only where the specific view is truly worth the extreme price of the thermal contract. The city may never actually abandon glass, but the extreme climate may finally force it to abandon the incredibly costly idea that luxury must always be transparent from every single direction. At extreme temperatures, the glass absolutely does not need to melt. The very definition of luxury only needs to evolve. Would you rather live completely exposed behind a full towering wall of transparent glass, silently carrying the massive thermal burden of the view, or live inside a deeply protected building specifically designed with heavy shadows, needing far less machinery to simply survive the fierce summer? Tell us your specific choice in the comments below. If this deep dive completely changed how you look at the towering architecture around you, like the video and subscribe to the channel for more detailed investigations into the invisible systems that actively build our modern world. A quick final note. The extreme regional temperature figure is utilized strictly as an outer benchmark for the region, not an everyday average for the coastal city center. This investigation does not claim the local government is officially banning transparent facades. The physical risk of thermal stress depends heavily on specific advanced design, protective shading, and installation quality. All discussions regarding future architectural trends and shifting economic viability are independent analytical scenarios, not specific technical, architectural, or direct investment advice.